I'm pleased to introduce our next presenter, LevelUp. Based out of Boston, Massachusetts, LevelUp is building the next generation digital payment network, connecting consumers and restaurants with a seamless customer experience that blends analytics, loyalty, and rewards. LevelUp is bringing this technology to market in multiple ways to help restaurant operators engage and serve consumers. With that, I'll now turn over the podium to founder and CEO, Seth Priebatsch. Hopefully I don't butcher that name.
Afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's had a good lunch and is excited for what should hopefully be a really interesting presentation for you guys on solving the digital channel dilemma. And I'll give a quick introduction on myself and on LevelUp in just a moment, but I wanted to kind of introduce the talk in the context of what has been the topic of a lot of conversations here today around how restaurant brands deal with the inherent dilemma of working with all of these channels that are driving orders to them, but in exchange taking large and sometimes ever larger commissions, putting downward pressure on profitability, restaurant margins, and presenting this sort of really complex dilemma of, do you go into the channels and get the marginal order volume? Do you not go into the channels and try and go your own and sort of build your own audience? And finding a balance between those two has been kind of on the top of everyone's minds today, and of course throughout 2017, and I'm sure through 2018 as well. So I'll introduce the digital channel dilemma a little bit to the degree that it needs an introduction, and then hopefully present a way to think about how to work with those channels and, you know, as the crux of the subtitle suggests, make a deal with the devil, but still keep your margins. So before we go too deep into that, just a very quick introduction on myself and LevelUp. My name is Seth Priebatsch. I'm the founder and chief ninja, technically CEO, but picked the title chief ninja when I was dropping out of Princeton to start the company, managed to convince investors to let me stick with that. We're now about 210 people up in Boston. We've raised just over $100 million. We work with 200 different restaurant brands, about 50,000 enterprise locations all across the country, and we help them do two different things that are very complementary. Part of the LevelUp business is the LevelUp agency business, where we work with different restaurants to build out their owned channels, you know, their mobile app, their web experience for in-store payments, loyalty, rewards, CRM, digital ordering, delivery, tying that all together into one self-contained ecosystem so they can know, understand, and manage the entire customer journey. And then the newest part of the LevelUp business, which we actually just announced yesterday, called LevelUp Broadcast, which helps them take their content, their menus, their rewards, their loyalty structures, and broadcast them out into all of these different channels, which you'll see how a lot of the thinking around this ties into how to effectively manage those channels to be present in all the places where your customers are, but also maintain leverage and maintain margins so that you can engage customers everywhere, but balance the profitability of customers based on where they're coming from. So that's enough on LevelUp specifically, and I'm going to kind of take a step back and go a little bit more academic for really the rest of this presentation to talk a little bit about that channel dilemma that so many restaurant brands are presented with these days. Probably the best place to start is that, you know, in many ways, this is a golden age for restaurants. There's one way of looking at what's happening where it's actually really exciting and really awesome for restaurants. More than ever, the biggest brands, the biggest technology companies in the world want to help you, restaurants, get more sales. You've got the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, the Grubhubs, the Postmates, the DoorDashes of the world, and all they want to do is send more customers your way, send more orders your way, and in some regards, that's kind of awesome. Of course, as we know, it's not quite that simple. In that they want, you know, a little something for sending those orders your way. So yes, more people want to send you more customers, want to send you more orders, want to send you more revenue, but they also want to take an ever-growing share of that revenue. And that presents the inherent conflict here. You've got your own channels, you know, your app, your website, and those customers are fantastic. In many ways, they're your most loyal customers, but they don't represent everybody by any means. And you get, you know, 100% of that order when it comes through. All these other channels do want to send you more customers, but they'll take anywhere from 15 to 40%, and balancing kind of the presence and availability of your brand across these different paths of engaging with customers is what makes that golden age a little bit less gilded, a little bit more complex. My favorite analogy for this is that this is the classic Faustian bargain. And for those of you who aren't as excited about kind of neo-Gothic German mythology as I am, a little bit of background on Faust. Nothing gets people excited after a late lunch than talking about Faust, but he's the canonical myth. Glad that gets at least one laugh from someone back there. Thank you. He's sort of the canonical protagonist who made a deal with the devil, traded what ended up being his soul for a lot of knowledge, a lot of power, a lot of wealth, a lot of excitement during his mortal life, but of course got damned to hell at the end of it and wasn't necessarily the best deal for him. In many ways, this is not the worst analogy for what's going on in the restaurant space today. You kind of have to do a deal with the devil when you make the choice to be listed in channels. You get something great up front. You get huge distribution. You get what feels like free marketing. You get lots of new customers, higher revenues, more orders coming through the door, and the only thing you have to give up is your soul, your brand. You give them the full rights to use the strength of the quality that you've poured into your food, into your concept, and in exchange you get something great, but it is, as kind of the Faustian parable tells us, sometimes a little bit of a challenging ending. Now, the point of this presentation is not to say that you shouldn't do the Faustian bargain. The point of this channel is to say, how do we think about the sort of equation of, damned if you do, damned if you don't, and find a middle path that enables you to get the good parts out of being in all those channels, because you simply cannot afford to ignore them, without completely giving up control, giving up margin leverage, giving up your soul at the end of it. And that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. I'm going to try and transition from this being what I imagine has been a totally uplifting talk so far into something that's a little bit more solution-oriented in just a moment. But I do want to present one more bit of industry data that actually makes this Faustian challenge a little bit harder before we get into a framework of how to think about solving for it. That last bit of data that makes this harder for restaurants is that the world is moving digital. I don't think anyone is going to argue that more orders this year for restaurants will come from digital channels than they did in 2017. In 2019, it will be even more. These are 4 restaurant brands across the LevelUp platform, and you can see in each of them, at-counter orders are slowly being cannibalized by digital mobile orders, both for pickup and delivery, and that trend is going to continue. In some ways, that's a good thing for restaurants, higher average tickets, ability to upsell. In other ways, that shifts the groundwork towards in favor of the aggregators, which makes it a more challenging negotiation to have later on as they get more and more digital orders, more and more likely that those digital orders come from aggregators, creating more downward margin pressure over time. If we want to look at how this is going to play out in the restaurant industry, we don't have to look too far. We can look at how it's played out in almost every other industry. The last 4 that really got hit by this trend of aggregation as things moved to digital were, of course, some of the ones represented here. When we think about booking tickets, you don't book tickets for the show you want to see. You book them through Ticketmaster. Flights, it's Expedia. Hotels, it's hotels.com. Pretty much all of commerce now goes through Amazon. You very rarely do you find yourself on an individual retailer's website. And this exact same trend of aggregation is likely to happen in restaurants as well, and that presents real challenges. When you go to hotels.com, obviously the hotel underlying is going to get a smaller portion of that booking. Some hotels, some airlines have been pretty effective at trying to combat that with intelligent usage of loyalty programs, but even still, the trend in a digital world is towards aggregators. As more and more restaurant sales move digital, aggregators are on stronger footing, restaurants are on weaker ones. So, I promised that I wouldn't just be a depressing guy up here saying that the world is going to get really complicated for all of us folks in the restaurant industry. So what do we have to do to think about managing that Faustian bargain and getting out of the damned if you do, damned if you don't cycle into something that is a compelling and sort of solution-oriented approach to dealing with the reality of channels and margin pressure? And what we've been focusing a lot on at LevelUp and helping our restaurants focus on and seeing some great success around is changing the equation from being one of ultimatums based on a single vector, presence, I will be in Uber Eats or I will not, and that single vector negotiation tends to be one that the aggregators win. At the end of the day, you're gonna have to be on the channels where consumers are. If JetBlue and Southwest couldn't resist the sort of onslaught of the Kayaks and Expedias of the world, it's going to be very challenging for any individual restaurant to win on the presence argument. You will eventually end up on Grubhub, you will eventually end up on Uber Eats, because there is marginal customer value to be had there. What we've been working with our restaurants to do is to say, hey, let's not make it a single source ultimatum conversation that we're not in a good position to win. Let's make it a 2-part conversation, one of degrees of leverage, of degrees of engagement with the channel by introducing a second vector, a second aspect of the relationship in terms of rewards. So instead of saying, I will be on Uber Eats or I won't, or I will be on Postmates or I won't, it's I will be on Uber Eats or Postmates, and based on the deal that we strike, based on the conversation that we have, based on the relationship that gets created between the restaurant and the channel, some level of my rewards program will be available to those users, which is great for Uber Eats and Postmates. And depending on if the deal is less rich or more expensive for me, some level of it won't. And this introduces a really powerful leverage factor for restaurants to engage with those channels and come away with a fair deal. No one can come up here and say there is a solution for restaurants to have complete leverage over the channels. In fact, in every other industry, the channels have won. All I'm offering from this presentation is a framework to think about moving the balance of power from being completely in their favor to being a balanced conversation to strike the best and fairest deal for long-term success, really for the restaurants and the channels. To put that into a little bit more of a visual, this slide is really meant to ask the question, which of these is better? And this is take your favorite big blue company, and they've launched a quite exciting entry into the food ordering space to drive more orders to restaurants. And given the option as a consumer, would you rather order from an experience that just shows the menu, or from an experience that shows the menu and the restaurant's rewards and perks program? And I think we can all sit here as consumers and say, hey, if I'm going to get rewards, if I'm going to get my loyalty points, that's a more compelling solution for me. And the channels feel the exact same way. They want to bring that value proposition to their users as a method of differentiating and building greater user acquisition, greater user value. So on a single channel conversation, this is a pretty easy slide to parse. Where it gets a little bit more interesting is that those channels are inherently competing with one another. While restaurants have to fight channels, the channels themselves are going after each other's customers with ever-increasing costs of customer acquisition. And so when you introduce this second vector of leverage, rewards, into a multi-channel conversation, now when you look at the slide, it's which of these channels is better. The blue channel, which just lists the menu and enables rewards to be submitted, or the red channel, which lists the menu and enables orders to be submitted. Sorry, I said rewards before. Enables orders to be submitted, but also enables you to have access to some or all of that restaurant's perks program. And as you can imagine, in this case, the red channel has a significant advantage over the blue channel, resulting in lower cost of acquisition for them and more value to their consumers, in many ways more value to the restaurants. But that type of leverage for them is something that, for LevelUp's restaurants, has translated into lower commission fees, into saying, hey, this is the conversation that we want to have. We want to engage more deeply in your ecosystem, bringing value to you. In exchange, we want to strike a better deal for ourselves. The channels that take advantage of that have an advantage in consumer acquisition, meaning over time, more of your customers are going through channels where you have a deeper method to engage through to their customers, and a lower commission, a lower take rate, resulting in higher margins over time. One topic that I haven't really touched on at all, but I think is worth mentioning because it might be a question that a lot of you are asking in the back of your minds, is why would I ever as a restaurant want to run any rewards in a channel that's charging me commission? If my customers want rewards, they should come to my website, they should download my app, that's my loyalty program, I'm not going to run any of those in channels. That's a reasonable perspective to take, but we're seeing that the breadth and the depth of consumer reach that these channels represent creates scenarios where certain rewards make a lot of sense to run. We're not saying that you should immediately be offering the full richness of your loyalty program on Grubhub. That might be economically dissatisfying for a lot of reasons, but there are certain rewards, certain offers, certain constructs that make sense almost regardless of commission and take rate. If you know, for example, that once a customer orders large fries with their meal, they're very likely to order large fries again the next time. Offering that to a customer as a perk, 50% off the first time, might make sense kind of regardless of channel. Earning loyalty points might be a really convenient thing to offer in certain channels that are pushing orders devoid of commission charge right now, like the Facebooks and Googles of the world, where you can engage customers on their turf but not suffer a commission charge, at least not yet. And that might be something where extending your loyalty program builds real differentiation in those channels and to some degree rewards the channels themselves for the good behavior of not inflicting an unreasonable commission. And there may be other times when you're launching a new item, and again, it's worth suffering both the cost of the discount and the cost of the commission on that order to drive more customers to feature your new items, which you think will increase loyalty to your brand over time. But looping back to kind of the broad structure of where this ends up, and again, this is the idea of combining the conversation with channels of presence and rewards into a single conversation. Where we think this ends up as a stable long-term solution for the restaurant channel combined ecosystem is that there's going to be tiers of channels. Every restaurant will probably eventually be in every channel. Probably makes sense, but channels are not all going to be treated equally. There may be some very expensive channels at the top, charging the 25 to 40% commission rate, and perhaps those are the channels where you as a brand should engage with them for presence, but explicitly disallow most, if not all, rewards, because those are the more expensive channels, and you don't want to give them any more advantages in driving consumers through their channels. You don't want to reward either the channel or the user for ordering through that channel. There might be a second tier of channels, either ones that are choosing to take a different route or ones where through a productive conversation, the commission rates have dropped to a more acceptable level, where you get to give them advantages, where you get to bring some leverage back from you, the restaurant, to the channel, saying, hey, I'm glad we had this conversation. We had this productive negotiation about how we're going to engage within, pick your favorite channel. And because of that, we're going to expose this subset of our rewards through your channel. It's really convenient for my customers. That's great for your users. And that ought to give you a market advantage against the more expensive tier of channels who don't get to offer rewards for my brand. Over time, that ideally pulls more users through those channels, increasing your overall margin on your average customer, and pushing the thought that, hey, a more reasonable balance of rewards and presence is beneficial for everybody. And then, of course, there's your own channels, which can't be ignored, are deeply important, may never represent more than 30, 40, 50% of your total customer base, but that should, of course, be, as I think we would all agree, the richest, most compelling experience for your users. And for the ones you can get there, that's the best. But for the others, this union of presence and rewards creates leverage to push better unit economics over time. So I've only got about a minute or two left here, but to wrap this up, the thing I would love to leave you guys with is hopefully at least a framework of thinking about how to deal with this Faustian channel dilemma that we're all wrestling with. No one is going to get on stage here today and tell you that delivery isn't becoming a bigger part of your business, that delivery isn't going to go through channels like a Grubhub, like a Postmates, like a DoorDash, like an Uber Eats. The thought here is to answer the question of how do I intelligently engage with those channels and maintain some margin leverage. And we think about that in kind of three core parts. This is a lot of what LevelUp has spent multiple years building with our restaurant partners on both the agency and broadcast side, but the underlying sort of core academic theory of how to slice this particular problem is true sort of regardless of your technical infrastructure, and I hope a useful method of thought whenever you're engaging with those partner conversations. Those three core things are distribute your menus into every channel. That's the natural end state. You want to be wherever your customers are. The more places, the better. Might as well beat other brands to the punch into those channels because they're all going to be there eventually, and fighting that tide is a losing battle, as we've seen from the hotels, from the airline, from the transport industries. The second thing is make sure that you broker those deals where you have the second point of leverage, where you can intelligently broadcast rewards into those channels. Some rewards into all channels, some rewards only into the channels where you've struck a deal that makes sense. And the third is to make sure that all that ties back into your core CRM or analytics or data tracking systems so you can really understand and segment and cohort the profitability of your guests per channel, sometimes even across channels. You'll see more and more people ordering for you the first time from an aggregator, maybe ordering from an experience like Yelp because it's so convenient, and then over time downloading your own app or using your own website, and being able to integrate that all into a single system to get a true measure of guest profitability is critical to understanding what channels are working for you, which ones aren't, and when you revisit those conversations the next year, being able to exert the right level of leverage. So just in the last 30 seconds here, if I can leave you with a single thought, it's that this channel dilemma is real. It's not going away. It's probably going to get worse, but a method of creating leverage within those channel conversations is to not think about the conversation simply as presence, to be there or to not be there, but to think of it as presence and rewards, and build a conversation with your channel partners around that to construct the best deal for you, for them, and for their guests as you head into 2018. So thank you guys for your time, and have a great rest of the conference.